I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the senseless, brutal murders of 4 University of Idaho students. It's the biggest case on our Court TV docket, and it is set to go to trial this summer. Here's the story. In the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022, the quiet town of Moscow, Idaho, became the scene of a chilling tragedy. Within the walls of a modest off-campus residence at 1122 King Road, 4 University of Idaho students, Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were brutally stabbed to death. The 3-story house, known among students as a social hub, was transformed into a grim crime scene. Investigators discovered a K-bar knife sheath near one of the victims, a pivotal clue that would later link the crime to the suspect. Investigators pieced together a timeline with a combination of surveillance videos, cell phone data, and witness statements. The community, once defined by its serene collegiate atmosphere, was thrust into a storm of fear and grief, grappling with the incomprehensible loss and the haunting questions that linger in the wake of this senseless act. This story makes me really sad. I mean, a lot of stories here do, obviously, but to me, the loss of young life are the most tragic of all the stories we cover on Court TV. Whether it's a small child or a young adult getting ready to live the rest of his or her life. And here you're talking about 4 lives that were taken. So the night all this was happening, the night into the early morning hours, right? There are some things happening. There is some activity. And one of the things that we're learning now from some of the recent filings that have been made in this case involves the DoorDash delivery. We've heard about this from the beginning. We had an idea when it was, but I want you to take a look here. This is the state's reply to the defendant's objection to the motion in limine. The state may rely on the attached records from DoorDash regarding delivery to 1122 King Road on November 13th, 2022 at 3:59 a.m. This particular evidence provides a timeline of events for Xana Kernodle before the homicides and corroborates the state's witnesses' testimony. Think about that for a moment. What we're talking about here, 3:59 a.m., so close to the time that all this is happening, that the killer is not the only one going to that home. Apparently there's this DoorDash delivery. So what is the picture and what is going on here? That brings us to the first question in our investigation that I want to take a look at. And this is going to be important and significant for the jury, obviously, for prosecutors to establish, and it's important for the defense, too. What was happening around the time of the murders? This is a house that has several people in it at the time. We believe there's 6 people in the house. You've got a DoorDash delivery going on. It just seems that for that time of the day or that time of the morning that there is a little more action than you would normally suspect. So let's bring in our guests to help us through all this. Here with us, he has spent time in Idaho covering this case, Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas and forensic death investigator, host of the very popular Body Bags podcast, which just celebrated, how many episodes was that?
350. Ben.
350 episodes. Joseph Scott Morgan is with us. Great to have you here. All right, Cody, I want to begin with you. Let's start with this DoorDash delivery. What do we know about the timeline when all this is happening? Give us some context as to what's happening.
Well, as with any timeline, Vinny, as you just said, context is important. And you mentioned all 6 of those roommates at the time, the night of the murders. And I just want to reiterate, that night of the murders, everyone that lived in that house and Ethan, who was visiting Xana, they all returned home somewhere between 1:45 a.m. and 2 a.m. Now, inside that house, Kaylee Gonzalez, Maddie Mogan on the very top floor, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen on the middle floor, and Bethany Funk, the other surviving roommate, on the bottom floor. So that's what it looks like inside the house. Now to the timeline with the DoorDash delivery. 3:59 a.m. That's when Xana ordered that DoorDash, and it was also delivered. Now, 1 minute later, 4 a.m., Dylan Mortensen, that surviving roommate, opens the door because she hears Kaylee Gonzalez's dog, and it wakes her up. She opens her door, pokes her head out, doesn't really see anything, just wanted to see what was up. Now, she closes the door, goes back inside her bedroom, but a few moments later, Vinny, Dylan then hears something to the effect of, "There's someone here." She hears a voice say that quote. Now, given that this is just moments after that DoorDash delivery, Vinny, this could very well have been something in relation to that DoorDash driver coming in, Xana going down to get whatever her delivery was. But now, 4:04 in the morning, just a few minutes later, the white Elantra, mirroring the one owned by Kohberger, was picked up on surveillance near that King Road house. And Vinny, this next time point at 4:12 a.m. is pretty important. Xana Kernodle's phone data shows that she was on TikTok. So Vinny, what does that tell us? At 4:12 a.m., Xana was still awake, but more importantly, Vinny, she was still alive at this point.
Joseph Scott Morgan, trying to figure out what's happening inside this house that's no longer standing there, by the way. At that time in the morning, the DoorDash is a good reference point, but it also paints a picture where it's 4 a.m., but everyone is not asleep inside that home. And you're wondering how the killer could get inside with someone awake on that main floor.
Yeah, how exactly can the killer be able to defeat the roommate's ability to hear and experience, their senses, the data that's coming in from the sounds that are emanating in that house? And then, you take it up to the next level. You think about, because I think that the two young ladies on the top floor, one of them was the intended victim, of course. And you have all of this going on upstairs, and still it doesn't really arouse much suspicion. There's not big alarm bells going off or anything. And then to be able to make it back down to that second floor and take the lives of two other victims, and then Dylan pokes her head out of the door and bears witness to somebody with bushy eyebrows. It's a bit skewed. I love what you said about having so much activity so very late at night. And granted, these are college students. They've been out at night. There were a couple of parties. There's a food truck, going to listen to music, these sorts of things. But still, this is very late at night. And to Cody's point about TikTok, I think that that's very important here. We need to hold on to that relative to knowing that Xana was still alive. Because I got to tell you, Vin, in my world, there's a huge gap of time here where the bodies were not discovered. So if I'm out on the scene, I'm trying to assess the postmortem interval, which I hope was done. You've got a big gap in time, and that complicates matters if you're looking for us to put a fine point on when precisely did they die.
Okay, Cody, let's pick it up from there now. So what's happening afterwards? What is seen? What is heard?
So a few minutes later, Vinny, Dylan Mortensen, that surviving roommate on the second floor, hears crying. And so she opens the door again, a second time looking around, and then she hears a male voice say something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." She doesn't see anything, doesn't see anyone walking around, but she hears that. She goes back into her room. Now, a couple minutes later, 4:17 a.m., there's a house that sits adjacent, next door neighbor to the King Road house that has surveillance cameras that have audio capabilities. The neighbor's camera captures a thud and more barking from Kaylee Gonzalez's dog. And now then, Vinny, a few moments later, Dylan Mortensen opens up her bedroom door for a third time, and this is where she sees the, quote, figure clad in black clothing and mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking towards her. And of course, it's at this moment, Vinny, that she gives that statement about those infamous bushy eyebrows. And then at 4:20 a.m., that white Elantra is seen speeding off from the crime scene.
All right, Joseph, your thoughts. 4:20, white Elantra speeding off. They believe that is the killer. They believe that is the suspect speeding off. We've got some of the other times, 4:12, Xana on TikTok or opening up TikTok. You've got Dylan opening the door a couple more times, hearing something. And then you've also got that video with the thump at 4:17. What picture is this painting for you as you try to put this all together?
You know, the first word that comes to mind, Vin, is speed, because you're talking about robbing these 4 young people of their lives in this short a period of time, and moving between these floors as if you've been there before, as if you know the floor plan, as if you know what it's like contained therein. You know, one of the most chilling videos to come out from me throughout this entire experience was the video from TikTok that was created by the roommates, where they were pretending to be one another in there. And if you take a close look at that video, even if you've never visited this physical location, you can get a sense for what this place looks like. So if you've got somebody that's lurking about out there that is in fact stalking someone, they have a real insight, a very personal and intimate insight into this environment. And, you know, that's always been my big question. Had the perpetrator ever been in this home before? Had they hid out in this home? Did they know the actions and the activities of people coming and going, who to avoid, who might be an easy target, and what were the personalities like of these individuals? Would anybody put up a fight? Has this individual ever interacted with them directly? And so for me, it goes to speed. It goes to speed and a familiarity with this environment because, brother, this is a tight timeline.
And Cody, what Joseph's talking about here is this house and the layout of the house and the way it's lodged up against this hill, extremely unusual. Like, we were studying it and it took us a while to figure it out. Obviously, we weren't there. But it seems like it would take a little bit of effort to try to understand the way to get in, the way to get out of this home.
That's absolutely right, Vinny. And one other thing that I noticed when I was there is how tight the roads are. You know, we see the videos of the white Elantra making a 3-point turn, turning around, failing to park. It's because that road is so tight, it's almost to the point where 2 cars can't get around. And then you go up behind it and there's a parking lot, but you still wouldn't be able to see directly every single pinpoint in the house. It's kind of hard, even if you were speeding off, you would have to get past several cars that were parked on either side of the street. It's not really a place where you could just speed through like any other residential neighborhood. So he would definitely have been, like Joseph said, sitting out. Maybe he was in the house, but you did not have a direct look inside that house to get an accurate look just from the outside looking in just that quickly.
Yeah, and then the parking lot on the bottom, you enter in the bottom, but it didn't seem like he went in that way, so he would have come in the middle of the house, which again is strange. All right, Cody and Joe Scott Morgan staying with us. Coming up next, is there any connection between the suspect's academic work and the allegations?
Determined the cause and manner of death as a homicide by stabbing, and determined that it was likely all 4 victims who were asleep during the attack.
Is Karen Reed a killer girlfriend?
She's guilty.
Or the scapegoat in an elaborate cover-up?
Karen Reed was framed! Karen Reed is accused of murdering her police officer boyfriend.
Defendant stated repeatedly, I hit him, I hit him.
She may end up taking the stand. Her first trial ended with a hung jury. They haven't proven anything.
Will a jury finally agree on a verdict? We know who did it.
The Karen Reed murder retrial. Live coverage coming soon following jury selection on Court TV.
The Latah County coroners conducted autopsies, and detectives have been provided with the results of those autopsies. We know that the autopsies confirmed the identity of the 4 victims, determined the cause and manner of death as a homicide by stabbing, and determined that it was likely all 4 victims who were asleep during the attack. Some of the victims had defensive wounds, and each victim was stabbed multiple times.
4 victims, some defensive wounds, but 4 victims, 2 levels of a home. This scene was obviously incredibly tragic, but also somewhat complicated, and at the end of the day, there wasn't a ton of evidence left behind by the killer. Now, prosecutors say there was one big piece of evidence, the knife sheath with DNA on it, But you take that out of the equation, and what else is in this whole crime scene? Which, you know, it's frantic. There's some fighting back taking place. Here's what's interesting. This particular suspect studied crime scenes, and as an undergrad wrote a paper concerning forced entry. And this is part from one of his academic writings. Is there any sign of forced entry to the home? This would be evident by broken glass from windows and pry marks on the doors or windows surrounding the house. This should be photographed, videotaped, and documented. If there's not forced entry, it may be suggested that the woman knew her killer. Interesting, right? Really interesting. When you talk about what they found or didn't find at this crime scene and what he knows from what he is studying, which brings us to the next question in our investigation. Is there any connection between his academic work and the allegations against him? Still with us, Cody Thomas and Joseph Scott Morgan. By the way, Joseph Scott Morgan, also a distinguished scholar of applied forensics at one of the best schools you want to go to for this stuff, Jacksonville State University. All right, so let's, Cody, what are we seeing in his writings? To me, that is significant because I don't believe there was any evidence of forced entry in this case, but I don't know if he knew them. What else are we seeing in the writings?
Well, you're absolutely right, Vinny. There was no evidence of the forced entry, and this particular writing, Vinny, was a final exam when he was at DeSales University in Pennsylvania, 12 pages long. What we're seeing is a guy that's really knowledgeable on what it takes to secure and document a crime scene. And in this assignment, it looks as if the professor gave them a mock homicide scene, and he had to write about what he would do to secure it from start to finish. Now, this particular excerpt from it has to do with documenting a crime scene. And in the paper, he says, quote, anything that is fiber-free and covers the mouth, hair, and overall body would be helpful in avoiding crime scene contamination, since hair, saliva, skin cells, and other bodily fluid or cells may be added to the scene, thus contaminating it. Even if we can't assume that there was an offender, despite seeming obvious, preventing contamination is an important way to ensure the integrity of the investigation and evidence. We should always treat the crime scene as if there is indeed a criminal homicide, as to not miss out on important details. That is how this crime scene is being handled. So again, Vinny, right here you see he knows about not contaminating a crime scene, wanted to make it as original as possible, not to leave any footprints behind. Very knowledgeable.
And you think about the allegations against him and what was found or not found at this scene. Joseph Scott Morgan, both of these excerpts that we've gone through here, one, no crime scene contamination. Yes, there's the knife sheath left behind, but when you talk about hairs or skin cells, things like that, it doesn't seem like they have any evidence like that on the one hand. And then you talk about the lack of forced entry that we believe in this case, that he was able to get in, indicating that normally you would look at people who knew the victims. Well, this is a guy who didn't know the victims. What are your thoughts? Is there a connection here happening?
Well, let's start with, he might not have known the victims, but he may have been watching the victims. And one of the biggest tells to me, and it still makes my skin crawl, is that the sliding glass doors, there's a high probability they were unlocked. And we've already heard about the keypad, remember, downstairs, that many people knew the code to that keypad. So there wouldn't be any need to defeat a lock if he's observing. Remember, those sliders can be seen from the brush up the hill behind the house. You can watch people come and go all night long. If you're seated back in the brush and the lights are on in the house, you can see everything that goes on. So that goes to familiarity. Now, I think that as far as fiber evidence goes, yeah, there's not a lick of it there, other than what they're saying is touch or trace DNA left behind on this sheath. And that's very important because there's two parts to it. First off, was he handling the sheath without gloves on, like practicing with it, actuating that snap. You can see the snap there featured. It's open there. And so if he's taking his thumb and actuating this thing, and maybe he's not aware of it, and he scrapes off some dead skin cells, that's left behind. But here's something else that I don't know if many folks have thought about this, but if we go to the Dickie wear, you know, the coveralls that he allegedly purchased, you know what they don't have, Vin? They don't have a belt loop on those. So if you look at the knife sheath that was left behind, it has got a prominent belt loop that attaches. So it goes to being unprepared. So you can write this up all you want to. And by the way, this is kind of a formula. This is done in a lot of programs out there, where you will be given a mock scene and you have to walk your way through it. It's almost like a recipe. I don't know what we can really infer from that, other than this suspect, this accused, did in fact have a familiarity with how we do things at scene, but never, under any circumstance, conflate a criminology student with a forensic scientist.
Absolutely. But they would have some they would have an advantage over someone who doesn't study this stuff. We have about 5 seconds here
coming
left.
in stone cold off of the street. Yeah, you're right.
All right. Great job tonight, as always. Cody Thomas and Joseph Scott Morgan, appreciate it. We've got more to get to. Coming up, will we ever know the motive? I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the Idaho student murders. Everything we've learned about the 4 victims has painted a picture of 4 great young adults getting ready to make an impact in this world. Meanwhile, we've learned very little about the suspected killer. Here's the story. He was born on November 21st, 1994 in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, and pursued an academic path deeply rooted in the study of criminal behavior. He earned an associate degree in psychology from Northampton Community College in 2018, followed by undergraduate degrees in psychology and cloud-based forensics. In 2022, he completed a master's degree in criminal justice at DeSales University. During his time at DeSales, he authored a 12-page paper titled Crime Scene Scenario Final, detailing procedures for securing and investigating crime scenes and methods to avoid evidence contamination. In the summer of 2022, the suspect relocated to Washington State University in Pullman to pursue a PhD in criminology. On December 30th, 2022, he was arrested and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary in connection with the November 13th, 2022 stabbing deaths of 4 University of Idaho students. He has claimed his innocence and has pleaded not guilty. In most of the tragedies that we cover here at Court TV, there's always the question of why. Why did this happen? In this particular case, that question was so significant because at first there was a search for a killer. So some people were wondering, and I'm sure investigators looked at it, was there some reason for someone to go after anyone inside that house? Was there a spurned lover? Was there bad blood? Was there anything like that going on? And that made people very curious about why this happened. Then there's the other part of why this happened. Like, why would someone do that? Like, what is going on with that person? It would take 4 people commit a mass killing, mass murder. Early on, James Fry, he's now the former chief of police in Moscow, Idaho, was talking about this issue. Take a listen.
Chief, have you identified a motive That is part of the investigation, and that will come out as we continue the investigation. But what we still ask is for people to continually send us things in the tip line. We are still looking for more information. We're still trying to build that picture, just like we have stated all along. We're putting all the pieces together, and that will help.
They have put a lot of pieces together, pieces of evidence that they believe can prove that the suspect in this case committed the crime. But I still have a question, and it's the next question in our investigation. Will we ever know the motive? Will we ever know truly why Ethan and Kaylee and Maddie and Xana were taken? Will we ever know the motive? Joining us to help us through all of this, clinical and forensic psychologist, researcher, expert on violent crime, and author of The New Evil, Dr. Gary Brucato is with us, and retired police commander, religious cult expert, and host of the podcast Profiling Evil, and author of the book Deceived, Mike King is here. Great to have you both here. I want to put this into the mix first in this case. This is from People magazine. Authorities have not said if the victims knew the suspect, but the suspect's now deleted Instagram account, which was reviewed by People before it was removed, followed the accounts of Maddie, Kaylee, and Xana. The suspect allegedly messaged one of the 3 female victims repeatedly 2 weeks before the slayings. An investigator familiar with the case previously told People. In late October, an account that authorities believe was the suspect's sent a message to one of the female victims. The source says, when the user didn't hear back, he reportedly sent her several additional DMs, direct messages. Basically, it was just him saying, hey, how are you? But he did it again and again, the source informed People. The suspect apparently never received any response. Okay. Mike King, I'll begin with you. Trying to figure out and understand why I'm sure it's a layered, difficult question, and I don't know if we have enough information now, but what are your initial thoughts about will we ever know the motive here?
Well, thanks, Vinny. It's great to be on with Gary as well. I think the thing that's most important at this particular point is that we're going to learn a lot as the case rolls forward. The prosecution will start releasing. We know exactly what you laid out, that there were apparently reaching out to the victims in this case, methods through Twitter and other kinds of social media. And oftentimes what we find when we look at the victimology, or why was this particular victim selected, we want to know, did the victim know the person, the predator that chased them down? And what's more important is that the predator knew who the victim was, and whether that was through some chance meeting at a bar in town or at a restaurant, or that it started in a different way, and these text messages or social media connections are indications that he was reaching out, trying to connect. The thing that becomes interesting is what happens in the language of those text messages as the responses don't come back. And do you see any kind of escalation or a little frustration starting to come forward? Because at some point, if in fact this was a victim that was selected and was purposeful, then that was a focal point for the suspect, and he was going after that particular individual. Whether he was rejected, whether he was angry, we don't know. But when we start thinking about the wounds that were on these kids, especially according to what family has reported with Kaylee receiving the most, you can see that there was some real focus there that really draws you in, versus this was just some kind of an opportunistic attack. And when we start adding all these other things that digital presence is starting to teach us about this particular suspect in the case, alleged killer, Kohberger, you start to really see the focus in on that location and the kids that are there, and particularly one in particular, Kaylee, in my opinion.
Dr. Gary Brucato, I want you to take a listen to Kaylee's father, Steve Gonzalez, and then I want to hear from you on whether or not you believe we'll ever learn the motive here.
You read the affidavit and you just find out that nobody understands exactly why, but he was stalking them, he was hunting them, he was just a person looking for an opportunity, and it just happened to be in that house. And that's hard to take. It's very hard to take. And, you know, I've said this before, where I thought maybe I should have put her in some gun safety courses, have done something, but she had her phone right next to her and she couldn't call 911. So these were just girls that went to sleep that night, and a coward, you know, a hunter that went out and he picked his little opponent that was girls, and that's probably why the house was targeted. It was because there was just girls there.
Okay, Dr. Gary Brucato, will we ever learn or know the motive, and what would it take to figure it all out? What would we need to know to get to the motive here?
Yes, I do believe we're going to learn the motive. I think that there's a tendency to elevate Kohberger to some sort of potential supervillain, but the reality is there isn't too much under the sun in terms of motive for violent crime. When it comes to homicides, in my experience, generally fall into three basic motivational buckets. The first being situational things that drive people that are in personal relationships that get upset because of things like jealousy or anger, and they impulsively commit crimes because of their situations. I don't think that's what's going on here. The second is individuals who have pragmatic aims, like wanting money or bumping somebody off because they're in the way or whatever. And people like that tend to have aberrant personalities. They're driven by narcissism and certain degrees of being psychopathic. But then we have this third bucket, which is the most difficult when it comes to understanding motive, which is people that have a fantasy. They just have a psychosexual fantasy, which is about, in some way, usually sexual, leveling the playing field for some hurt that they have experienced in life. And people like that will have a fantasy and then go out and cast it. And remember, this is somebody who was accused of purchasing a K-bar knife 8 months before the killings, well before he would have had any contact with any particular individual involved. So that what we have to picture is somebody who developed a fantasy, took a little while for it to gestate, probably fed it with fantasy and certain things he was viewing, etc., and then decided one day that it finally took shape in the form of a particular victim. My sense has been that in this particular case, that the victim was one of the people in the home, was the special target of fantasy, but that nothing went the way he had planned. Control was lost, intel failed him, and everything turned into this colossal catastrophe where nothing sexual occurs, at least overtly, and you wind up committing a mass murder. But I think the focus had been one victim, and it was a fairly classic psychosexual aim, where the idea was to hone in on a victim and play out a fantasy that had been built for some time. It is otherwise extremely difficult to explain a situation where there's this much premeditation, this much callousness, and a knife that's bought 8 months before.
Incredible insight from both of you. It's amazing to get a much clearer picture tonight. Mike King, thank you so much. Dr. Gary Brucato is going to stick around. Still to come, will the suspect ever speak publicly?
Yes. 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 No. Yes. Yes.
Before next week's season premiere of Interview with a Killer, relive the most shocking moments of season 1.
Tell me, why are you here?
She needed payback for what she did.
You meet someone that make you angry and you shoot them.
Are you not prepared today to take responsibility for any of your crimes?
Interview with a Killer Marathon, Sunday at 7. And season 2 starts Sunday, April 13th, only on Court TV.
The maximum penalty for this offense, if you were to plead guilty or be found guilty, is death or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes. 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 No. Yes.
Mr. Kohberger, do you understand the charge in count 1, burglary?
Yes.
Do you understand the maximum penalty?
Yes.
Do you understand the charge in count 2, murder in the first degree?
Yes.
Do you understand the maximum penalty?
Yes.
Do you understand the charge in count 3, murder in the first degree?
Yes.
Do you understand the maximum penalty?
Yes.
Do you understand the charge in count 4, murder in the first degree?
Yes.
Do you understand the maximum penalty?
Yes.
Do you understand the charge in count 5, murder in the first degree? Do you understand the maximum penalty?
Yes.
We haven't heard a lot from him. I mean, one-word answers. He hasn't really spoken at length. It's tough to get a true read on what this guy is like because he doesn't really talk. Let me take you back to his arraignment. Like, you go back to the arraignment, I don't think he said anything.
Your Honor, we will be standing silent.
Okay, because Mr. Kohberger is standing silent, I'm going to enter not guilty pleas on each charge. Counts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Standing silently, right? So, you know, a couple of yeses here, a no there, a few more yeses, like that's it. And that brings me to the next question in our investigation, and it's about the suspect. Will the suspect ever speak publicly? And that could take many different forms, right? Like, he could do a television interview, right? That's not likely, but he could do a television interview. He could perhaps speak in court. He's got a trial coming up. Can make a statement. He could take the stand. You know, he could speak if there is a penalty phase in his case. If he's found guilty, could speak then as well. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities, but will he? Still with us, Dr. Gary Brucato, and joining us, prosecuting attorney who worked on both Chad and Lori Daybell's cases with death penalty experience. Rachel Smith is with us as well. Great to see you. Rachel, let's talk about in the courtroom. Do you expect either in the guilt phase or the penalty phase, if he's found guilty, that this suspect will ever speak publicly in court, talk about something, talk about his life, talk about himself, talk about what happened?
I don't think you're going to see him speak. I think if he listens to his attorneys and they have their way with him, you will not hear him testify. Given what they're saying his diagnosis is, given several of their motions, those lawyers are going to do whatever they can to keep him off the stand. Even if he wants to, he seems to be listening to his lawyers. He seems to be paying attention. He's following their directions. And I don't think he's going to testify in either the penalty or the guilt phase.
So you think even if he's pleading for his life, that he won't necessarily speak?
I don't think he will. A lot of defendants in that situation do not speak. In a capital case, they often rely on their family, their mother, their father, their siblings, sometimes even their third grade librarian. So they will often let others speak for them rather than speak themselves. And that's typically the advice of counsel. That is their right under the Fifth Amendment. And I will be very surprised if his attorneys encourage him or in any way put him forward as a witness. I suspect he will waive his right to testify, and the attorneys will go forward with other people speaking for him.
Okay, Dr. Gary Brucato, is this someone who may want to speak someday? Like, let's even look down the road, whether it's, let's say if he's convicted, if he's whether he's on death row or life in prison, again, if he's convicted, he's presumed innocent right now, claims his innocence. Do you think he would ever want to speak? Do you think he would ever want the public attention?
I most certainly do. My sense is that if this is motivated in the way that I suspect, then what you'd expect is that after a period of defense and perhaps being found guilty, what you would then expect is somebody who wants to correct the public narrative and draw probably a great deal of control and attention out of it, like a lot of the offenders who commit crimes of this type after the matter is settled and they are incarcerated and are sitting there, particularly somebody who studied other offenders and may have thought things like, one day they could be thinking about me, I could do it better, I'm smarter than them, etc. I think one of the advantages of the way that he's being conceptualized, you may see some odd behavior, etc., is that it explains away some of the little outbursts that he may have during the trial if anyone dares to say anything that doesn't match the narrative of what really happened or makes him feel out of control or slights him. Because we know from people that knew him, that interacted with him, that he always had to be the person in the room who knew the most and talked down to everybody, particularly with females. And it's very difficult to imagine him controlling himself during the trial because of that. And as a consequence, I think once things like, the question of death penalty comes into the picture and the possibility of conviction. So this is somebody who would then say, you know what, I might as well set the story straight, and milk this and make myself part of the pandemonium of offenders. I am not convinced this is somebody who will not one day never stop talking. But I think that superficially speaking, he's got to not do it for defensive purposes.
Rachel, what are your thoughts about a jury that is deciding a man's life? And again, this is if he gets convicted. He's presumed innocent. I understand that. But if he's in that penalty phase, from your experience, what do jurors want to hear from the person that they are deciding life or death for?
Yes, absolutely. Jurors always want to hear from the person that they've convicted. They want to hear their quote-unquote side. They want to be able to hear any evidence that they can get from the person who is on trial. They're given the instructions. They're told that they can't require it. Jurors, I believe, follow those instructions, but they're human. They want to hear from the suspect, and the defense will question them on that during voir dire, and make sure that they won't hold it against them. But yeah, jurors are human. They want to hear from the person on trial.
Dr. Gary Brucato, we only have about 20 seconds left here, but what are your thoughts about death row for this guy? Do you think he would rather be by himself on death row or in Gen Pop if he's convicted?
It's a very difficult question to answer. I personally think that Gen Pop would be very difficult for somebody like him. I mean, I think the whole problem with whatever it is that motivated this is some failure of ordinary connectivity with human beings and then compensating by kind of condescending to them or having to be smarter than them or hurting them. And so as a consequence, I think the more isolated, the better, living in a fantasy world where people are writing him love letters and letters trying to understand his motives and all that, and he can view himself as fascinating. I think it would be a lot better than having to be with human beings, which I think was the hell that he was in that probably motivated this entire thing.
Dr. Gary Brucato.
If he's guilty, that is.
Yep. Thank you so much. Rachel Smith, appreciate it. We'll be speaking a lot about this case. Now, I know, you know, we all know that defendants have the right to remain silent. We also know their attorneys like to keep it that way. Now, if he's convicted, it would be very enlightening to hear from the accused killer, a way to understand why this happened, and if there were any signs anywhere that were missed. I think that would be the importance of hearing from him if he is convicted. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.